All right, so some of you guys were asking about design, and so we're going to go over that in this video. Now, it's really a large topic. There's so much that can go into it now. So we're going to start with just some 2D stuff here in Krita, kind of go through this in design template A3. But design is pretty much when you are just creating anything. Like it doesn't have to be functional. It could be form over function. But there's so many avenues of design. It's insane. So there's literally like architectural design. There's you name it, right? Industrial design, abstract design, lighting design. It just goes on and on and on forever. So with that in mind, I think what most of you guys are asking about is just like more industrial design type stuff, or maybe like prop design, video games, and things like that. So uh, that starts really simple, and it really helps to just get into a 2D drawing program or use a pencil and paper, something like that. Just keep in mind when you're coming up with designs, they don't have to be functional, but do you want to take your time to figure out what you're going to make and how it should look and everything else. So I like to just start with sketches, whether I'm going into 3D or not. You can use 3D design as well. So we're going to turn off smoothing here for the brush, but just sketch things out. Like if I'm trying to make some kind of like weapon or staff or something, right? You can literally start with like what I call cloud gazing techniques where, you might just play around with some stuff in black and white. Just try to figure out your shapes and your forms and your function to what it is you're creating, right? And so this goes through an iteration process, generally speaking. Now you can also do this in perspective, so like 2-point perspective preferably, but you can also do things like isometric drawings and things like that. So, but create another layer on top. I might go over this with a little bit smaller of a soft round brush here, so I'm using the airbrush, right? But you can use like square tip markers or whatever. You can use whatever brush you want. Use textures. It does not matter. And at the end of this, all I'm trying to do is find things that look interesting that I might want to create. So if I'm creating some kind of weapon, I might need to fill in the blanks here and kind of come up with the different ideas behind it. Now, it really starts with a prompt. So you need to think about like, how are these things built? Who uses them? How are they utilized? What are their capabilities and things? So really think about those kind of things before going into this. Think about like when you read a book or a novel, it really, you start to develop this mental picture off just words. You need to do that for yourself. Do a little bit of world building behind whatever it is you're creating. What does it do? Is it functional? Do you need to solve a problem with its function? What can it do? Then do that. Is it made of wood? Establish those things. Write a prompt for yourself. Go to town. Now I'm going to keep these kind of simple here. This is just kind of a quick little demo. So this is more or less what I call napkin sketching. A lot of guys do this. Start with some very basic premises of like maybe these need to be more spiky nature, so you might add spikes to all of them, right? Maybe they have like some kind of other little element, like a little chain that is attached to them that they also use to swing at people or something. I don't know, something like that, right? And so you can do these loose sketches, no problem. Here's a fun little tip. Instead of using a white background, you can add in a fill layer and turn it mid-gray. This is something I picked up from traditional art. You can certainly use in digital. And so instead of just working with black on a white background, which can be a little bit troublesome sometimes, you can now use black and you can also use white. So you'll have background black, foreground white, or vice versa. But you can press X and toggle between them. Now you can add little highlights to things too. So you can start to define volume, shape with a little bit of shading here, just at like a preliminary level. So you kind of figure out what you want to create. Right? Of course, if you're doing more mechanical type stuff, you wouldn't do these kinds of shapes. You'd be doing more boxy shapes. And that's a lot of fun too. So you could just sketch something out. Like a lot of times it helps to like overextend your lines. You're doing like, there's like one demo here on YouTube somewhere where someone's making a mouse. They literally are just kind of like dicing it up and some stuff like this, right? Overextended. This can be quite fun. You just chop off corners. So you can use the eraser, just hit E here in Krita. You can use Procreate, Photoshop, doesn't matter. Or you can use vector programs too. So Illustrator, Affinity Designer, those are good ones. And you can certainly go through and add some shading on top of this. Just a couple strokes to get started. Kind of develop your form there, right? So that would be like a mouse, something like that, right? Essentially a mouse. And you're going to keep working this idea out. You'll create more or less like maybe a set of thumbnails or just loose sketches that you can do super fast that you're not committed to at all. Do that kind of number. Draw other things as well that might help you figure out how you want to come up with these ideas. Like I like that, but I'm gonna stick to go this way. All right, so it's like the Reaper stick or something maybe. Add a little highlight to it. Get an idea of where it's going. There's a little gem in here. You see how fast this can go? So design's really quite fun once you loosen up and you get into the idea. Now, after you go through this process a little bit, usually you'll do this like on a couple layers or whatever. You'll probably knock them back down. You'll use another layer, and then you can go through and ink it. And here in Krita, hard round brush, pressure sensitive size. Make that brush smaller, turn on some brush smoothing. Okay, and you might go through the process of just doing like a detailed sketch, a non-loose sketch. I just go through this process now, just kind of inking it. We're going to ink this one. I like that tip there. You can always change things too. We're going to go through the process of just inking this one though. Nothing real fancy here. I'm kind of going through it fast, so it's not going to be perfect, but you really want to spend your time inking or lining it. Also, it helps to make these larger before you do this, generally speaking. So you would grab this with like a marquee selection and then transform it so that it fills in more of the canvas because they're really small right now. They're still like thumbnail size. So you might want to do that as well. You can spin it like I'm doing right now if it helps you match the angles that you're trying to go for. Unless you have another kind of like add-on or program like Lazy Zoomy or something like that, this is usually quite beneficial. Okay, so just coming up with a bunch of shapes and forms here. On the interior side of things, it's probably not a good idea to do solid lines everywhere. It's probably a bad idea. You can also do a loose sketch on top of this to further refine it and then go back and ink it later. So you can keep working these little iterations going back and forth. Okay. Just want to get through this one, and then we're going to go jump into 3D. Talk a little bit about using non-parametric or parametric modeling, but also destructive modeling and designing in 3D as opposed to designing here in 2D. So one of the things I want to mention about that real quick is like certain things like architectural design. If a building or something is going to have lots and lots of repetition and very strange kind of shape to it, it might be better to start off with blocking out in 3D and doing all of the work over there, believe it or not, as opposed to trying to do it all here in 2D. If it's there's going to be certain things that take a lot longer to sketch and draw than others. So maybe making something like this, very simple and straightforward, kind of sketch and get your ideas going. But some of those architectural elements, maybe not, right? So you also need to get good at creating not just shapes, but learning how to do them in perspective, particularly. So do you take the time to learn how to draw things in perspective? Okay. And learn how to combine shapes together, learn how to cut shapes apart. Because if you're looking at this, these are flat orthographic side views, but um, let's just do a box real quick. Say you had a box. Oh, it's a messed up box, but let's just say you had a box, right? Something like this, and you wanted to cut out a little area here. It's really quite this simple. You literally, you know, 2D version of box cutter here. If you're used to using that add-on, erase that line. So learning how to do subtractions like that and then combining shapes together as well can be quite beneficial. So in this case, say I want extension here, just a little bit. See, I can extend out. Oh, I keep my line straight. But that would no longer be visible, right? So we would end up with something more along these lines. Those probably shouldn't line up, but right. Anyway, so you get the idea. You can add and subtract to a shape. This is how you basically just generate cool stuff real quick. Let's finish this one off. We got a little bit more to do. Just go with like a weird rounded bottom here. So you need to understand those shapes because what you're going to do is as you're designing these things, try to translate it into 3D at some point. You end up creating a lot of paradoxes, like MC Escher stuff. You're going to have a much harder time trying to recreate these things in right? But we can see how this went. Here's a pro tip for you. Connect all of your outside lines so there's no gaps in them. So there's absolutely none, okay? The reason why is it makes it much easier to select this and fill it if you were to do this, all right? Now, not every program requires you to do this. I think Procreate doesn't require it. Certain part of Krita doesn't require it, but Photoshop will. So you take that into consideration. Also think about line weights. We haven't really been playing with that here. Line weights are extremely important to help bring out certain design elements away from each other. Line weights are huge. Line weight's just the thickness of the line. I keep missing that one. It's frustrating. There you go. So this might be in front of that a little bit. This is still in the background. Might have a little drop there. Shadowed areas, right? So this is very abstract right now. There's not a lot of detail in it that would be recognizable necessarily. So that goes in front of that area. That number. Background elements, thinner line weights. Things like this can be. I'm gonna make this one just a little thicker. This one will be a lot thicker. Go too crazy right there. You can also do hatching. Can add some shading this way. Or cross hatching. Sketching. Art school stuff, right? So maybe this is cut inwards, like a hole in the bottom or something. So it takes some time to get used to just sketching and drawing in this manner, but let's get through it. Let's go ahead and you'll see here we have this going on. Let's actually, I'm just going to grab the eraser for this one. There, yeah. So we only have this one we're worried about right now. Let's go ahead and we're going to fill it. So magic wand tool in Photoshop here in Krita is called the contiguous selection tool. Bam. Click on the outside. You'll see that if we did this correctly, it doesn't select anything inside. In this case, we have a gap here. We definitely selected inside. So Control Shift A. Let's get rid of that. Let's go back to our brush. Go ahead and fill that area in a little bit more. Hopefully that was it. And now we can use that tool, select outside of it. And you can see much nicer. And that's a prime example of why you want to make sure everything connects. Sometimes you might have holes in your object. You can use like a shift or a control or an alt, depending on which program you're in. You get a little plus sign, boom. Now you can actually select that area as well. And so what we're going to do is go to the selection up here, same in Photoshop, basically. We're going to invert selection. That's going to select everything inside of it now. Okay, and then when we do select here, we can shrink selection. And in this case, I'm just going to do 1 pixel, but you might want to use like 2 or 3 or whatever the case may be. If you don't get it right, you can always go back and select less again or shrink selection again. So if I do this, you'll see it selects like so. So now we're pretty much underneath the lines we have already created. You create a new layer, use the fill bucket tool, go to like a mid-gray, click, boom, it is filled, Control-Shift-A, get rid of that. Drop this below this area, the lines basically. So now we can see we have it filled, right? And what's cool about this is, I'm going to use a marker for this one, square tip marker here, okay? We can alpha lock this with this little icon, boom, right here. And so alpha locking, all that allows you to do is now you can actually, I'm going to use yellow to demo, but it won't go outside of that fill area basically, right? Generally speaking, a lot of guys will go with straight shading first, so just keep that in mind. You might turn the opacity down, and you might just add some shadow in here, maybe turn it up in this case. Might just add some shadows in the bottom sections. It helps to not use smoothing for this, so go back to basic. Might do this number, right? And wherever there should be shadow, you might just add a little indication of shadow. Now this is really good for concept, basically, because you're just coming up with the idea, and now you have it in place for the most part. You can determine like where you want your light sources, where you want most of your shadow at, all that fun stuff, right? But nothing fancy here, guys. Nothing fancy in this video anyways. So now I have a design, we have our ideas going. And it happens just that quick, like really. The background right now, of course, is gray, but if you're going to print this out on printer paper, you can right click properties, turn it back to white. Yeah. So now we have that nice little setup there. And that we can also add highlights. Go back to white and add highlights as well. Just real quick where we think they should exist. Like right here, a smaller brush. Just kind of fill them in real quick. Gonna lighten everything up basically. A little bit down the middle there. That side might be a little brighter. So it doesn't have to take forever and a day. Very quick, rapid way of coming up with ideas. And so a lot of times if you're creating like environments and things like that, you might do this kind of sketching for every little aspect of the environment before you even try to model it. Because if you don't know what you're creating and you start modeling, sometimes it can be problematic. You'll end up just kind of doing the same things over and over and over again and not knowing what looks better or worse, because 3D has this weird thing about you start a project and then what ends up happening is that you don't see the changes from one to the other, and so that could be a little bit of an issue. So if you duplicate, like in this case, something like this, duplicate it out and you make changes and modify it or whatever the case may be, right? This is not a good model, but now we can clearly see the differences between the two. However, it can be a little bit problematic sometimes. So anyways, let's go ahead and jump into this. So use all the tools at your disposal. If you want to sculpt, sculpt. If you want to use Boolean workflow, using box cutter or hard ops or something like that, you can do that. Those non-destructive methods are usually pretty good for this, but not always. Sometimes you do want to go with destructive methods as well. When it comes to doing the actual production model, like you're putting it into a video game or something like that, these models you create here, this is considered pre-production. Just coming up with the design itself. The pre-production models can be pretty messy. You don't have to work with a solid shape. You don't really necessarily even have to care if it intersects with itself. The cleaner you make these things, the easier of a time you're going to have getting them to be more purposeful, like when you're actually modeling them for production, but it's not necessary. If you just really want to come up with an idea super fast or quick, you can do these kinds of things. I'm not making that staff right now, but just want to show you an idea here. Like these are two objects, right? So we have the ability to play with this idea. We could turn things on like box cutter if you have the add-on. Just start doing this number. None of this is destructive at this point, right? So you could literally um, grab this and do like a bevel on it. Some of this may or may not work too good, depending. You can see we have some issues with the bevel right now. Um, Generally, that's just because there's extra things you need to make it work correctly. In this case, it's going to be a little bit rough. It's kind of all, there's nothing really here to work with. But so for example, I just cut a line there and I beveled that now. That might work out now compared to what it was doing, but it might not as well. It's kind of a bad example. Huh? All right, so let's get around this by doing it right. Let's go ahead and with box cutter on, you get a smart apply button up here. So it will take the shape away. Right now we can modify that shape. You see I can press Q and E and mouse wheel. I can select different shapes, bring them back, continue making adjustments with these. This is actually pretty important in my opinion because this is the idea of design. Like you want to be able to change things if you need to change them. But then at certain points, like you want to do like a bevel across this whole thing, and now, like down here, it's kind of working, but down it's breaking apart in some areas, and that's mostly just due to the fact that this is probably I'm gonna dissolve this edge. There you go, and probably due to the fact that I just need more polygons, and I need to probably manually bevel these as well. That would help, right? And some things like this area in here when you after you do a manual bevel, you might be able to get auto bevel. Like we're using a bevel modifier, we're pressing Q and doing bevel. So sometimes that'll help doing it here, right? But sometimes you might want the bevel above it, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a little workflow to this that you got to keep in mind. It doesn't just all happen kind of magically, but there's a little bit of technicality to it. And so that's I think one of the main benefits of working in 2D as opposed to 3D. Um, there's a skill set that's required for 2D, but there's also a skill set required for 3D. And the 3D aspect of it, um, if you're not real familiar with it yet, it can be pretty problematic in my opinion. Not saying that it's impossible, that you won't ever be good at it, but just it does take a little while to get used to, right? So you can learn all your fundamentals on design, like rules of like 70-30 and um, how to like mirror. Basically, there's like a symmetrical thing going on here. Like this edge should maybe run into this edge at the bottom. That one maybe run up to that edge at the top. Things like that come into play. And so um, taking those little considerations and running with them can go a long way for design. Forgot what you call it, mirroring or mimicking or matching angles, or I don't know the exact term for that, but it'll make things just look a little bit better. And then of course, when you're working with box cutter, and I like to do everything in object mode, but when you're working with box cutter, you can certainly cut up your shapes and add like depth to them and stuff like that. Whoop. It's not supposed to go that way. Right, so you can see I just did that big cut like that, went all the way across. But this is a new cutter. I can just scale that one, bring it down. Maybe I want to go into edit mode, grab the bottom face there. And you can see where this is going because we're not stuck here. You can move things around, shift them, shade smooth here, auto smooth it. Want this to be set in a little bit. So ES to extrude it, ES, bevel that whole section a little bit. Bevel this one. Now we can see where that's going. So this is all part of the just design basically. Um, This particular one, I feel like I want it to, so let's grab the middle, bevel it out, Control Shift, Control Alt Shift S. Might have to hit W, X, or Z after. But you can do these numbers like this, which is quite good. There's an add-on called Mesh Machine, which lets you destructively mirror things. So Alt X, do a symmetrize real quick, which is really good. I use that thing constantly now since I got that add-on. But double these ones as well. Sometimes your shading might go a little crazy. So there's a lot of little shading tricks that probably won't hit in this video, but uh, things like auto smooth help, but there's also weighted normal modifiers. See, might have to check keep sharp on that one. So if you're just doing general design, coming up with ideas, this is fine. This will take you very far. When you start doing production models, this mesh, specifically when you're doing baking and everything else, will start to have a little bit of an issue. And you'll have to actually go through this and just very carefully craft it together just so that it works well in game environment. Um, Not necessarily sub-D modeling, but something very similar, specifically from inside Blender here. Blender has a little Achilles heel that it doesn't really, um, I'm not going to say it doesn't work well for low poly models. It does not do as well as it probably should for extremely low poly game models. So if you're doing more like next generation stuff, not a big deal. It works just fine in my opinion. But the moment you start trying to do like mobile ready stuff, you're going to have a little bit more issues if you're trying to bake normals and stuff onto it. Not sure what, okay. It cut the way I thought it was going to. I was like, I'm not sure why it keeps trying to cut weird. Nope, it's good. Got kind of something going on the same as the top up there. That's what I wanted. I don't want these back ones, the top ones, just these ones, like that. You notice how it's beveling kind of weird? When you have a shape, you non-uniform scale it, meaning you scale it in one direction, it'll start having issues. So press Control A, apply scale on the edit mode. Now you can actually get a better bevel going. And sometimes you might have things that happen that you just don't want to have happen. So you can always just use box cutter, set it to gone or whatever. Just toss it out, dice it out real quick like that. Also, I am using box cutter for most of this, but there's a add-on that comes with Blender called Bull Tools. Just keep that in mind. Bull Tools is extremely good and does something very similar, but you have to create your shapes first. Okay, you'll see that this doesn't want to move up there. I want to dissolve those for the time being. So I can just pull this one up. Hit Q and E. I did a video on Bull Tools, so you can go check that one out. What? Which one's getting diced? I don't see. Oh, okay. It was a cut on the main object there. Okay. Just that. All right. So we can hide our cutters, turn those off. This one we can, I don't know where this one is. Let's hide it, press H. So you can just press H too. Select them and press H. All right, so there you go. We have some kind of design going, guys. And let's just do Bull Tools real quick, just to point something out. Let's say we were going to start dicing into this in other ways. You could use hard ops, you could use other add-ons to do your Boolean cuts. But if you are using Bool Tool, this is what's going to happen. You're going to edit preferences, add-ons, and look for BOL tools, right? And find them at some point. Let's make this a little bit smaller overall. Yeah. There you go. And so if you hit Control-Shift-B after enabling that add-on, you'll see that you have brush booleans. These are the non-destructive ones. Auto booleans are destructive. But when we select like this and then hold Shift, select this, and then Control-Shift-B, do a brush boolean difference, this is what we end up with, right? And so we can scale it. It's almost like using box cutter, but it's set to exact. Try fast on everything. And if you need exact, use it, but fast is always going to work better. It has better performance. Exact starts to slow down real quick, so just keep that in mind. Also, you can do things like mirror these over. So I was to add a mirror modifier if you're doing this manually. Add a mirror modifier, you pick the middle object, you'll mirror across it if the origin point's in the center, that is. And so you could do things like bisect as well if you need to, but just so you can do mirrors. You can also do solidifies. So you can do a lot of the things box cutter does, but it's just it's pretty automated with box cutter, whereas hard ops, whereas here you got to do everything. So you might have to check even thickness or do whatever like harden normals and stuff like that. So add edges and cuts and all kinds of nonsense. It can be a little bit confusing. Turn it off in edit mode. Hit those little icons, turn them off. Bevels. Also, keep in mind, lots of selection methods always go and use boundary loops, loops enter regions, rings, loops. Assign them to shortcuts or hotkeys if they're not already assigned to one, or if you want to access them a little bit easier, you can do that number. So you can see I added that bevel, and apparently it just lost its mind over that because it's doing the solidify after. So that solidify is probably too thick, to be honest, or it's going the wrong way. So we'll try and change that and see if it works better that way. Okay, not too bad. Okay, anytime you want to apply things without smart apply and all that, you can just convert to mesh. It will bring all this down, right? Numbers like that. So all of these cutters you had made previously, they're all hidden still. Press Alt-H, you'll see they all come back. Even though we applied this cutter is still here, not needed. We can delete it. With those kinds of things in mind, you can continue working on this now, making changes as you see fit. So something you can do. I wanted to add another shift click here, add a cube. See the origin point goes to right there. Shift right click, by the way. It goes to the surface of the object. Right. So because of that, now we can here changes. Select that inside. Alt Z is a big one. Is a lot. So I have a shortcut for doing brush Boolean differences. Also, something I didn't mention, I probably should have. When you do convert to a mesh, that's cool and all, but if you're using Bool tools, Control-Shift-B, you select the main object, the main shape, Control-Shift-B, you actually have an Apply All button too. And you can do that, and it removes the objects that are the Boolean objects as well. So that's kind of like a smart apply for Bool tools, which is real nice. Always forget about that one. So there we go. So now you're well underway of being able to do some really wild things, all right? Might want to just bevel here. Probably a little bit more resolution than that, but so you stay as non-destructive as possible. It'll take you pretty far, basically. What we're getting at. Bevel that. See how that worked. I didn't know. It's not smooth because your cutters, believe it or not, need to be shaded smooth. And as a result, I have to turn on some auto smooth. See what you can get going on. Is it might not take effect until you add either a weighted normal modifier, keep sharp, sure auto smooth is on. Clear any custom split normal data. Sometimes that pops up. So you might want to take that and clear it as well. Or geometry data clear. It usually says clear if it's you have it. If the auto smooth is grayed out, this is what you're looking for. that button, say clear. So you can do the quick or using machine tools here, you can quickly mirror over, hide things. We'll turn off box cutter for a second. Just keep in mind, switch them over to fast if possible, right? Pretty important. All right, and that just gives you the opportunity to like add things, intersect things, have fun with this. You can texture these, right? In this situation here, I'm actually gonna apply the effects. Sure, clear that custom split normal. We're gonna add the weighted normal fire. What it keeps doing is when we apply, keep sharp. Might have a little bit of a shading issue here. But basically, what's happening is when you apply this, it's applying the weighted normal modifier. That's what's been going on. So this one's an interesting problem because a lot of guys will run into this. Even though it's marked sharp and everything else, we still have like these weird shading issues. This is just a downside of the Boolean workflow, using ngons and all that fun stuff. Basically, I'll select all the way through. Middle mouse click. I'm using the cursor selector, so C, D's and that thing. But basically, I'm going to do a boundary selection. So select loops, boundary loop. And there's the reason why this tool exists right here. It's called Mesh Machine. It has Boolean cleanup. A lot of times this will help clean up those areas very quickly. Extremely useful when you're working with Boolean ngon modeling. So, because sometimes you will just have issues like that with little vertices that are just so close to each other they really mess up the topology. But you can see here what's happening is that these three vertices are going to start to or four vertices are going to start to triangulate across this face, and there's nothing there to stop them or hold them in place or nothing, so they're going to shade badly. And so little things like that can be merged. Want kind of shift things around a little bit. So like this whole edge here, probably are willing to sacrifice it. You can do things like that. Go back through here, Control E, mark that sharp. Might help that out a little bit in that area. But you still have that main issue there. So if you can, use that add-on, Mesh Machine, paid add-on, but it's an experimental feature. You have to go into the preferences of the add-on and turn on unsupported or experimental features. Select the boundary loop, and then you're going to do an offset cut. Okay, and this thing's pretty awesome because it just lets you create kind of like this holding edge in that area and simplify. And so that usually helps out quite a bit. In this case, we got a little bit of a weird result, but that's a loop. We should be able to run Boolean cleanup on this as well. Just kind of clean it up real quick. All right, so that area is going to start shading a lot better, that particular spot. This is just comes down to having good or bad topo, basically. Situation, okayish topo. This is not like sub-D topo though. Yeah, but still, little things like that can go along. Generally speaking, more polygons would be better in this situation. This does not have enough curvature to support this tighter curvature here. And so those are the kinds of things you got to look out for. Now, when it comes to sub-D, this is another modeling technique you could always utilize. I prefer doing this for more organic stuff. You start a model, you apply a subdivision surface modifier to it, turn it off in edit mode, bump up the count to whatever you want. And so as you're modeling on it, turn it up more, shade it smooth. Every time you go in edit mode, it's the cage. Go back to object mode, it's the regular model. And so you can quickly check it and see what's going on with it and if it's going to work out the way you want it to work out. Now this requires, it doesn't require all quads, but for the most part, it's best to model everything in quads, generally speaking. But you can end up with some pretty stellar results doing this kind of stuff because like if you wanted to just swing something out like that, back up and then try doing, let's see, let's fill that. Let's do a grid fill. So grid fill is a good way to patch things. You can change the offset. Now when this subdivides, get this kind of thing going on. Follow the rules of subdivision, or quad modeling, should I say. We could tighten up corners, doing things like that. Maybe we want to pull this one out a little bit further. So that becomes soft again, so we need to like maybe rerun this a different way. So that these connect using the knife tool. And as a result of that, this doesn't work out too well in this area. So we have to maybe go through this and knock it out like so. And then that should work out right there a little bit better, right? Maybe. Okay, so let's try this. We'll grab here, and then we'll grab dissolve. So let's do that one. Loop cut here, I'll tighten up the front section. It's not really what I was going for. It's kind of what I was going for. Pull this one out further. Take that whole section and bevel it. And so something interesting here is that you can still do Booleans. Still have a lot of fun with that. Tighten it up with some loop cuts. But the thing is I like to do this in edit mode now, believe it or not. I'll turn it on and I'll set it to destructive. And so if I do a Boolean cut now, with box cutter in this case, I want to keep it more simple in nature, right? And this is this mesh is non-manifold, meaning like it has open ends. So it's going to create this big empty cavity here. You can try switching the Boolean operation over to exact. Sometimes that'll help out and it might actually close it up a little bit, but you can see we have errors. So what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to apply the Boolean, delete the Boolean shape. So it's still very destructive, but a lot of times you can have a little bit of fun with this and move these vertices back into place, dissolve some others, and you can see it's got quite a bit of mess going on. So you do have to kind of clean these things up, but it can be a little bit more problems than it's useful sometimes. Just an idea there. Generally speaking, I don't really recommend this, but it's doable. So if sometimes you just have to have a certain shape and you're not sure what you're doing or how you need to make it happen, you can make it still. All right, so I'm trying to select that back face and this face here. Not that one. These ones. There, delete them. It's more problems than it's worth sometimes. But for the most part, we got that. Barely. Barely got it. I'll slide this one forward. Merge it. A and merge by distance. So now we can go through this and press J and run this one all the way through like so. Same over here. Might want to have a press spacebar. KCA. Might want to cut one all the way through the bottom out here. You'll see we still have issues. This is a double or something's going on. Or it's just a weird thing going on. Anyways, but we can grab all this stuff. Grab all of it. Press I to inset and then O, and we can do an outset. That's going to give us a holding edge. You can see this one dip down, turn on edge rail. Usually that'll go away. So now, if we did that the opposite direction and we did just a pure inset, you can see we have issues. Press A and merge by distance. I'm going to bump this up one because I think we got some things kind of real close to each other that just aren't meeting. Or it might be like a double edge in here, something going on weird. Double face or something. Sometimes weird things like that happen. So we can go through this real quick. Turn box cutter off. It's going to cause more problems than it's worth sometimes. You see that inset will not work. It just simply, there's something going on weird. There's a double edge hiding. Sometimes that happens. Carried away. If you delete one edge and an edge remains, it's probably what's going on. Let's see what else causes problems now. So it's still an issue over here. It's another issue. There's a double edge right there. I just saw it. Yep. Can't you see that's like the most deadly Blender mistake right there. Cannot see them sometimes. And then you can't merge them either. It's really bizarre. But now we should inset. Oh, there's a double edge here. It's on top apparently. On bottom? It's on bottom. Yeah, that's my least favorite error. So there you go. If you ever run into that problem, that's what it is. If I hit B, do boundary, there we go. Boom. Okay, using mesh machine, quick mirror, right? I do some loop cuts here. So now I can do a inset, use loop tools. It's an add-on that comes with Blender. You got to enable it. Go to edit preferences, add-ons, enable loop tools. You can do a circle. In this case, it generally creates a pretty decent circle, but sometimes you got to rotate them, which is kind of annoying. Do Control X to quick dissolve the center. If you still want to rotate this, swap over to normal, then rotate on Z is usually what you got to do. Kind of balance it out a little bit better, perhaps. You'll see it's actually rotating on its normal, so that's good. We could inset. Oh, let's inset. We'll control inset again. Maybe we want it like that. Inset, loop cut, loop cut. You can actually loop cut up to the middle. Press E. That's going to make it even. So you press E and then F, make it even with the outside, or F with the inside. So inside, boom, there we go. So this middle section, we can close this by just hitting ES, ES, and then merge at center. So M, merge at center, boom. There you go. That should work out just fine. You could, of course, always try other types of ways of filling the inside here. So you could do something like Control F, grid fill. Boom. So now we end up with this kind of mesh super quick like this. We can also add in like little seams and stuff if needed. So if we want to do like paneling or anything crazy like that, if we do keep it real simple at first, it's not such a big deal. So like, see here, we got this little loop I started, basically, this little selection going around. If I bevel that, let's cut it all the way through the model. To the other side. We'll mirror it again, basically. Bevel it. Inset. Inset again and hold control, push it in. That's all I'm doing for this one. I can mirror it over. Lots of design stuff in this one, guys. So now you get an idea of how you can just work with things for the most part. We didn't touch on sculpting, but I'm certainly able to just really push your boundaries and your limits on how you want to approach things. These are not exclusive either. You can use them interchangeably. So you can start with something like this, convert it to a mesh, and now you can go start box cutting it up if you wanted to. This here, you could convert to a sub D if you really wanted to. If you're going to do that, though, I highly recommend not going too crazy with the bevel amounts and the sides there on cylinders and stuff if you're going to try to convert it to sub D. Now, if you're going to take it into sculpt mode later on, you might want to go crazy with that and just have a lot of fun with making it as smooth as possible. It's going to save you a lot of extra work when you get over into sculpt mode. So design in general, just have fun with it. Figure out what you're trying to create, problems you need to solve along the way. Personally, I would go with parametric stuff for a large portion of it, and then use some sub D as well. Just really just depends up to you. Like if I can do it in 2D, I'm going to stay over there. I think it's much faster than knocking things out in 3D. Generally speaking, unless it's like really big, complicated architectural stuff or lots of angles and perspective or something, right? And so anything you make in here, you can apply materials. You can render it as well. I just want to mention this. If you go to your render settings under film, transparent, you set up a camera and you do a regular render, you'll get your render out and it'll have a transparent background unless you don't have it set up for that. But you can do quick previews like this as well. You can sketch all over these and figure out what things you might want to change on this next. So 2D and 3D is not exclusive either. There's times you might want to take something like that. What we just saw there was like a preview render. Take it over here and just sketch all over it real quick just to see what it might look like with different things on it. However, Blender is pretty awesome, and it does have an annotate tool. that you can actually snap not just to a 3D cursor, but a surface. And so you can actually sketch on these things here in Blender as well. So if you're like, what would it look like with a little, maybe change this under view, annotations, start drawing, you'll see it's blue. Just change it to like black. So what would this look like if I did this, or I did a cut here, right? And so you can still like concept on this basically here in Blender, which is awesome. I've had problems with the annotation tool kind of disappearing later on. I don't know why, um, but there's always the grease pencil as well. So if you use the grease pencil instead, we're not going to go over that in this one, but there's a way to set it up to basically do the same thing. And it'll let you kind of go around and sketch and draw on your models. And you can see this is actually like 3D as well, which is kind of nice. So you can figure out like what it might look like with that. And then maybe you just place the 3D cursor, so Shift S, cursor is selected, and then use that annotation tool with the 3D cursor instead. So it'll actually draw at the level of the 3D cursor here, as opposed to the model. So then you can always like come into the side view and say, what would this look like if we drew like some crazy nonsense coming out of it like that, right? And then, so you start getting the idea here of what's going on. All right. And you turn it off of the in front or behind thing here. So just keep that in mind. So now you have a lot of fun with this, but you will have to unfortunately switch back and forth between the two there. You can also use view, which is a little bit problematic, but so maybe go section in here. I don't know. Panel here is up and control to use an eraser. You see what I'm getting at anyways, right? So anyways, that's it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed checking this one out. Took a little bit of time, but hey, you're free to explore now. You get an idea of like what you can do, where you can go with it for the most part. And I'll see you in the next one. All right, take care.